Hello and welcome back to the Hard Knocks podcast, brought to you by John Fox and David Fox, where we talk about all the things that we see sales and marketing teams get wrong every single time for decades and decades. I mean, you're still seeing some of the mistakes you've seen made 30 years ago.
Sure. Right.
Yeah, so we want to help you not make those mistakes by bubbling all up to the top and sharing them with you. So I figured maybe we'll just get straight into it today.
Absolutely. Let's do that.
So something that is a really big pet peeve of both of ours, and it's kind of surprising how difficult it really is to get companies to do this,
Right.
but it's not visiting customers.
Right.
Like, when we say not visiting customers, we mean of almost every type, but especially literally going to their HQ, going to where they are, and seeing them in person, not a Zoom call. Zoom calls don't count, actually being in person with them.
Right. Exactly. I think a lot of this has to do with whether or not you actually enjoy being with your customers. I always did, but there's probably a big section of folks that are just so comfortable being online. It's really a challenge for them personally to get involved with their customers and getting to know them. But I think it's wonderful when you get to know who your customers are, a little bit more about their background, kids' names, all those kind of things really play a factor in long-term relationships, which is really what you're after, because at some point you want to stop investing in all of your marketing and you want to have people that just want to do business with you and love you. I mean, that's what I
exactly.
think it's all about, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, you also just learn so much because there's so many things that they'll share with you to get comfortable with you.
Right.
If you see your tool, your product, the teams you're helping literally, in action.
Right, right. And a lot of this has to do with repeat sales too. When customers enjoy doing business with you, more than likely they want to introduce you to their friends, their family, their contacts.
Yep.
You don't have to really even ask for referrals because they want to help you. They want to help you grow your business because they recognize that when you have a strong business, you're able to help them do even more. So it really works in a nice fashion where one hand's feeding the other.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason why this hard knock came up for both of us is that we, a little while back, we were doing business with Stark Industries.
Right.
Yeah. And they had a great product.
Yes.
They had a wonderful team. Wonderful team. But the problem is that it was so difficult to ever get any member of, their VPs or their CEO to actually go out and physically see a customer. It was really difficult.
Yeah.
And especially in an age, I mean, this was back during COVID too. That made it even more difficult.
Right.
But when that was all said and done, I mean, it was hard to get people to go back to trade shows, which was their only saving grace. And then they stopped going to those too.
Right. Well, some of that was economics. They just stopped going to some trade shows because they didn't pan out.
Yep.
Others that there's a lifespan of trade shows, and there's some. After a number of years, they just start dying out, and I think that also hit them.
Yeah, it does. Well, and also, like we talked about in our last session too, they probably never really had much of a follow-up plan.
Correct.
It was kind of difficult to set that one up for them.
Yeah, and all that didn't help them at all.
No, it didn't.
Correct.
So for people who aren't quite sold yet,
yeah, exactly.
on the fact that you need to see customers, let's talk about some of the things that happen if you don't start physically seeing customers. And I think one of those is something that, I didn't coin the term, but I believe Luke Wroblewski uses all the time. It's called the company customer gap.
Yeah,
now,
talk about that. That's really interesting, I think.
Yeah. So basically, here's the notion, right? If we get fancy with editing, maybe I'll put the graphic up. Ooh, right. So you start off when you're a startup, you are here and your customer is right here, okay? You are like right next to each other.
Right.
Because basically, when you're a startup, you are your customer, right? So you're closely knit. You see everything that's going wrong as it happens. You get extremely rapid updates to your product, to your service, whatever you're doing, because you're right next to each other.
Right.
Okay?
You're solving a problem, and you know what that problem is because you've probably experienced it, which is why you're starting your business.
Right. And so then what happens as you grow, right, you have other functions come up. Right. So all of a sudden now you start to have like a dedicated marketing and sales team, right? You as the C-level exec or the leadership team aren't necessarily actually seeing the customers anymore.
Right.
You're going through those different teams. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you have to be cognizant of it, which is why over here you have to kind of circumvent those teams to go back and talk to the customer. Now, what ends up happening is that you get bigger and bigger and bigger. There's more things in between you. Now there's
Right.
lawyers. Right now there's your HR team.
Right.
There are so many different things. And so all of a sudden what ends up happening is if you aren't dedicating time for your leadership team, people up here who generally have to go through like 10 different streams to get back to the customer over here saying, I have a problem.
Right.
And no one's fixed it in 3 years. Right, all those forum posts I'm sure all of you have seen many times before.
Right.
That's what happens. And so if I don't circumvent that, those problems just breed continuously.
Yes.
And you end up, I mean, you can build things that don't need to be built, that don't exist. You're not fixing the right things. You're wasting money.
Angry customers.
Oh, angry customers.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things for me is you lose your best insights.
Yes. Right. I think some of that also has to do with just how a company grows over time. Mm-hmm. Many times in the very early days of a company, your sales team is really leading the charge with the company. Over time, operations starts to take over. And if you're not careful, and this happened at Intel, and a friend of mine coined this term, his name's Clem Mees. Hello, Clem, if you're listening. And he said, you always have to watch when a company starts putting the bean counters in charge of the business. That's when you want to sell the stock. And by the way, if you watch Intel stock over the years, when the bean counters came in, stock went down.
Interesting.
Really a mess.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful because your sales team are trained to listen to the customer, to solve problems. They want to do that. It's inbred. And the farther away you get from that and the more processes that you put in place, process is good, but if you forget that whole idea of listening to customers and solving their problems, you eventually are going to pull away. You leave yourself wide open. I'll give you one example now that's occurring. Right?
Yeah.
Anyone who's listening to this probably is using QuickBooks as their business system, their accounting system, right? It's terrible. Their customer service, terrible. They try their very best, but they don't solve real problems.
Yeah.
Right? Someday there is going to be a day of reckoning. I can predict this, that at some point another company, Zoho or someone, is going to come in and it'll be all over for them. Now, has that ever happened in history? I'll give you a history example. Sears. Sears was one of the greatest mail order companies, retail companies that we've ever seen. They were amazing. Yeah. They started Allstate Insurance, for instance.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and many other companies. But over time, they started separating from who their customers were. They built a big tower downtown in Chicago, the Sears Tower, if you remember. Anytime a company starts building monoliths to themselves, you know it's over. And it wasn't too many years after that, and Sears is no more, basically. As far as I know, I don't think there's much left of Sears.
Yeah,
right?
I can't remember the last time I saw one when I drove down
Absolutely.
the highway. Yeah.
So it's not something that happens overnight, but it does happen. Many people don't believe that these old companies can go out of business, but they do because they lose sight of who their customers are.
Yeah, I think what you're really bringing up is that just like you lose kind of your best insights.
Right.
And you build things that people don't want.
Yep.
Right. I think one of the biggest, what would be a good word? Sins isn't really the word I'm looking for. Maybe one of the biggest follies is that you end up creating cracks between you and the customer.
Correct.
Right? Because it's a huge gap. I'm
Right.
not trying to mend it all the time, right?
Right.
And the bigger you get, the bigger the cracks get. And you know where startups and exceptionally smart people who love to innovate go? They live in the cracks.
Sure.
And the bigger that crack is, you're just giving them so much leeway to start building capital and ideas
really
and a
true.
customer base. And then all of a sudden, that crack breaks, and you have to either hope you have enough customer loyalty left that you can send out a repair crew to the highway to go basically patching it up, or you destroy it entirely, your business is over, and someone else just ate your lunch entirely. And that
Exactly.
whole market segment or your business is now just gone. And that
Right.
happens. It happens all the time.
It does.
And that fact, that's probably the number one reason why big companies or small businesses, medium-sized businesses, everyone end up going out of business when it looked okay.
Sure. Right.
Yeah, it just happens.
It happens. Right.
Yeah.
Or maybe they don't go out of business, but what happens is they'll get purchased by a competitor at a very low valuation.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
I mean, many
The
people will
table's
say,
completely turned.
right, many people will say that the value of your customer really comes down to one thing, and that is your list. Do you have an active customer list? Do they buy frequently from you, and do they have major purchases, or are they all very small purchases?
Yep.
And so when you evaluate your list, it has a lot to do with the value of your company. And if your customers can start trailing off, spending less, buying fewer times, that's a key insight that something's going wrong. And you can see that years in advance, by the way.
What's your favorite metric or way of seeing that? So if someone here is curious on, hey, I've got a small business, or maybe I'm the global marketing manager.
Sure.
Okay. And I'm seeing everything going on right now. We know AI is huge.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
And there's a lot of things moving around very quickly. If I'm interested to see if maybe that might be happening to me, what are you looking at? Like, speak to that individual right now.
Sure.
What do they do tomorrow?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is, how do I evaluate or put a value on my list? And
Okay.
there's this thing called RFM, which is recency, frequency, and mean.
And by list, we're talking about primarily emails. Does this include phones, addresses?
It's
or
your
like...
customer list.
Okay,
Right?
got you. Cool.
So
Yep.
it's all of the above.
Got
right?
you.
And so how recent have they purchased? That's a key component. What's the frequency? Do they buy every quarter, once a day, once a month, once a year, once every 10 years? Right?
Yep.
And the mean, what's the average purchase that they make?
Yep.
When you put all of those three together, it's almost like a three-dimensional cube. When you put all those together, you can put a pretty decent value on your company versus your competitors. So that's one value.
Yeah.
The other thing is, in a more qualitative sense, is to ask your sales team, or if I was going to come in and talk to the executives team, I would say, when's the last time you went out to see a customer and actually sat down with them, bought them lunch, walked around their facilities, whatever it is that you're selling or marketing, right? Most of the companies that we even deal with,
Yeah.
that is a rare occurrence. Sales
Yeah.
team, that's their job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But
We're talking to like C-level exec, leadership team.
Absolutely.
People really in charge of
Right.
making the final decision of, are we going to do this?
right. Yeah, many of them don't even go to conferences or trade shows. So they're not rubbing shoulders with their competitors.
Which is a shame,
It's
because
a shame.
saying that your CEO, for example, is in town
Right.
is like a silver bullet.
Yeah.
That you get to use to get that meeting, get it over the line. You don't use it all the time.
Yes.
I mean, you don't have to do it that often.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that I have recommended, I've blogged on this before, is that when you're traveling and you're a director, executive level, C-level, VP, that level, when you're traveling into someone's territory, so assume you have 10 salespeople or hundreds, to inform the people there and say, hey, I'm coming in town. I'm going to spend an extra day of my time. Can't be that much, right? An extra day. Maybe you bring your spouse. Maybe you bring a family member. I'm all in favor of bringing a child with you, right? Your 15-year-old, 18-year-old. They
Hey,
need to.
that was me.
That was you, exactly.
was me.
Right. And get them involved in the business. And you can do that with Fortune 500 companies. This is all great stuff these days.
I mean, especially nowadays.
Absolutely.
yeah.
People love seeing their kids, right?
Yeah.
So when you're traveling and you're coming in town, just ask, hey, I'm coming into town. Could you set up some meetings for me?
Yeah.
Or could we have a dinner with a couple of people, right?
Yeah. Well, what's great too is that if you've got LinkedIn and you make sure you keep that up to date, and I imagine most people here probably do.
No, they don't.
Well, hopefully you do, especially
Right.
with who you meet.
Yeah.
Because then if you're traveling to a city for a convention, you can do a real quick scan to say, oh, here's who's even
Right.
in the area. Send them a quick message and say, hey, I'm going to be here. You want to meet
Sure.
up for a coffee or something? I mean, people are generally pretty receptive to doing it too.
I totally agree.
Yeah, it's an excuse to
will
get out of
say,
the office.
I'm going to be Debbie Downer here, though.
Yeah.
As far as LinkedIn, the majority of people that I know that are good friends of mine The only time they go on LinkedIn is when they're looking for work. They've lost a job and now I have to brush up my profile. I
Yeah.
better get on LinkedIn. I better start reaching out to people.
So but in terms of me finding out if I do keep my contacts right up to date, I mean, the location of most people is generally still fairly accurate.
And LinkedIn tries its very best to do that too, because
Yeah.
having moved from Chicago to Denver, I didn't change my location in LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But it started asking me, it looks like you've moved.
Oh, that's cool.
Right, which
Oh,
was
that's
cool.
good to know.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I made that update,
Yeah.
and it didn't change anything. It's just that they knew that I was logging in from a different location on a very regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So let's talk about another way that, because we kind of transitioned from talking about here's what happens if you don't see customers.
Right.
Okay. Well, let's
Yep.
talk about how you can fix that. Right.
Sure.
So you talked about one, which is stay an extra day if you're going to be in town
It's
with
awesome.
people.
Right.
Yeah. That's
We'll
really
call that
great.
ad hoc. I think that's not really programmatic. It's not.
Yeah.
It's just something that you would do. And I would say again, if you're in operations, if you're in a support role, if you are someone that isn't regularly seeing customers, you need to go out and see customers and spend time with them. And that's the ad hoc. But I think you're asking, what's the programmatic way to do this?
Right. Well, one of the things that comes to my mind is, as a nice, simple solution, is start picking out some more trade shows.
Absolutely.
Especially, I mean, ones dictated by which ones your customers are going to be at.
Right.
And if you don't know, I mean, you could ask them.
Right.
You can ask them.
Right. But the fast way of figuring that out is to go to all your competitor websites and see which ones they're going to be at.
Yeah, via their
Right.
blogs and etc.
It doesn't take long. It's maybe a day-long adventure online looking at what your competitors are doing and where they're showing up, where they're speaking, for instance.
Yep.
And you can pretty quickly come up with a list of where you need to be. It's not really that difficult.
Yeah, but what's really nice about trade shows too is it's a really, I mean, one, they're going to be talking about their business, which is great. So you're going to have the right people there you probably want to meet.
Right.
And their schedules are there.
Exactly.
The only difficult thing is you probably have to be a little bit proactive about it because you want to make sure that you can get that private dinner or that private lunch later on.
Sure.
Yeah, and,
Right.
and that the people are actually going to be there. I mean,
Right.
all that stuff. So you have to work on a little bit ahead
Sure.
of time.
Right.
But it is a really nice and simple way. You don't even have to buy a booth. I mean, you probably shouldn't buy a booth.
Right.
Right. I mean, you could work
First
in
year,
the,
definitely walk it. You don't need to go spend money.
Well,
on booth.
even in that case, I mean, you could literally do stuff like offer to like go in their booth for like half a day.
Sure.
Right? I mean, one, they love you to death for doing that. I mean,
Yeah.
working a trade show is a lot of work.
It is.
Right? But
a
if
lot
you
of
had
sore feet.
Oh yeah, if you had a vendor come along and be like, "Hey, I really want to see how you run your booth." Right? Because we're a part of this, etc. I mean, it
Right.
could even be an hour. My gosh, talk about making their sales team just love you to death.
Oh, it's great.
And you
Right.
learn a lot too because you get to see how they talk with other customers.
Sure, especially if you sell through distribution and you're the supplier into a distribution channel and offering to work one of your channel partners'
Yeah.
trade booths, huge.
Oh, well, I'm
Huge.
just thinking if I'm a software company or a service company or a product company, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I see how my customer is selling their service or their product.
Right.
Well, talk about a prime example to be like, oh, wait, we could build that for you.
Right.
Oh, hey, we've been thinking about this idea. You were just struggling with that. Why don't we go do it?
Exactly.
Now, that it won't happen for every customer, but I mean, you're putting yourself in the position to be successful.
I agree. Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to mix it up. Now,
Yeah.
the programmatic side, I'll say.
Yeah.
And this comes from Bill Perry, one of our colleagues. Bill runs a very successful PR firm out of Buffalo, New York. And he and another firm years ago established something that I had never heard of. But once he explained it to me, it made all the sense in the world.
Yeah.
Right. And so this was a startup at the time. And they didn't have a lot of money to put into marketing. But the one thing they knew is that they were solving a real problem for customers. Right. So that was good.
Yeah.
And they started out with a customer forum. And they invited, I think it was only 4 different companies to come in and come together for a couple of days and just talk about the problems that they have.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Now, it's kind of an interesting mix in how that particular industry is set up. But what we learned through this is that engineers in particular or buyers people that are specifiers of a particular product, I'll use the term, they don't get out much. They don't get to see their colleagues. Once they've left college, they really don't have that mix of how do other people solve my problems, right?
Like-minded people.
Like-minded people, right? So
Yeah.
you end
Well,
up
I mean,
in
people
these.
they were all together, and then you
Yes.
split across the United States and the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so you kind of get siloed in your business when you think about it.
You do.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're solving your customer problems. You have your colleagues in the business. So you might have a colleague in.
So there's a want in these people that let's kind of tie this back, right?
Yes.
You as a C-level exec leadership team member,
Right.
want to see all these people. Your problem is, in this case, I have like 100 people I would want to go see.
Right.
That is so much travel. Like that is an impossible amount of travel, not to mention
Right.
expensive.
Very expensive, right?
Right? Now,
Right.
and time consuming. And so it sounds like what you're trying to get at is you are starting to think outside the box of, okay, well, there are 100 customers here. And I know that the people I want to talk to would love to talk to these other people because they're like-minded individuals. They all think very similarly. They probably love to do brain shares. It's just that either A, they don't know each other, right?
Exactly.
Or
They don't know.
B, they simply don't have the time to do just what I was thinking. I don't have the time to go fly there all the time.
Right.
And so what's the kind of the solution to that problem then?
Well, think about what the solutions are. So you can join a peer group if you happen to be in an industry that has a lot of like-minded people or similar businesses in your city.
The solution for those customers, not for you as a C-level exec.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Right. So you want to see if there's. Well, let me back up. If I'm trying to solve a problem as a service provider, I have a product that I sell or a service that I provide, and I want to get in front of as many people who have that problem. Okay. So one thing I can do is visit different peer groups of like-minded individuals.
Sure.
Right? I can come in and speak. Right? That happens regularly. However, if you're selling something that's a little bit larger that doesn't have that small geography, you need to find a way of getting all those people in a room together. Now, that can happen at a conference, for instance, and you can be a conference speaker. But you're a speaker and you're not a listener. You want to get to a point that you're listening to your customers.
Right.
Right? So when you're speaking at a conference, you are 1 to 500, right? You want just the opposite. You want to be in a room that they're talking to you.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
The only way that I know to set something like that up is what Bill did. And that is you invite these people in that have a similar problem. You have a customer forum, and there's a lot of companies that do this very well. Salesforce, for instance.
Yeah.
It's amazing. They really listen to their customers.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's a whole party, in fact. And so at a small scale, again, most of our customers are smaller businesses under $100 million. So they invite these people in, and so in Bill's case, they started out, I believe it was with 4 companies.
Yeah.
And that grew to over 100. It grew to a
Now-
3 and 4 day event.
Yeah, and we're talking about basically instead of going to a conference, you do the opposite.
Yes.
Which is you make your own conference.
You make your own conference.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah. Just to kind of quick summarize, right?
Yeah.
You're saying,
Thank you.
great, you have 100 customers, great. You could have a little golf outing with all of them. It could just be I meet up at a hotel for a couple
Great
of days.
idea.
We're talking about
Sure.
this, right? That's the opposite way of doing it.
Right.
And you own all those relationships and the talks, and you get to dictate everything that happens. I mean, it is a lot more work than going to a conference, but the payoff is huge.
Right.
And in Salesforce's case and many other, I mean, honestly, this is how many conferences even get started.
Yes.
Is that it is a company literally doing this.
Yes, exactly.
Right. I believe Litmus literally did this.
Right.
You know, the email marketing platform.
They're an amazing
starts
company.
really small.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, oh, now it's big because
Yes.
this guy told this person, told this woman, etc. And all of a sudden now I have a conference.
Right.
Now that's not what your goal should be, but it's a really nice way, again, to go incentivize people to come to you.
Yes.
So you don't have to split yourself up 100 different ways.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing that you're doing for them is you're helping them solve a problem.
Right.
Right? You're there to provide a location for them to talk and share problems and solutions. And it's not just something that you're going to solve. So this is not a sales pitch. You are having people literally in your home, if you will.
Right.
And you're letting them talk among themselves and talk about how they've solved certain problems. Now, maybe a couple of those problems are things that your company solves, but the rest of them aren't, right?
Right. I mean, your goal isn't to sell your product.
Right.
You have to remember that your goal in doing this is to see your customers.
Correct.
And part of seeing your customers is seeing things that they're doing that you're not necessarily helping them with.
Correct.
But you want to understand more of the context of what's going on.
Right.
But you want them to know that you care.
Yes. And I'll have to say that many times you have, I'll just call them fissures in your company. There are cracks that you don't know about. You have some salespeople that may be irritating your customers, things that have not gone well, and your customers don't want to tell you. And the only way you're going to find out is that you have a close relationship and you're late one night at the bar or something and someone comes up and says,
Man, I really hate Joe.
Exactly.
I just hate him.
Yeah.
He's annoying. He calls me at the worst times of the day. Whenever I come to with a problem, he shuns me. And then I'm only still in this because I like you.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that happens quite regularly. And so if you create that environment where people are free to share their thoughts, it's remarkable. It really is terrific.
Now, both the solutions that we offered are great if you have time and you have basically you have some time to spare.
Right.
Now, there is a third solution, which is if I don't have time, but I'm willing to pony up the cash.
Yes.
And that is doing customer research or something that you did for a long time, which is specifically buyer persona research.
Yes.
Which is you hire people who are specialized in going out and talking to your literal customers, asking them questions like, all right, why did you buy this product? What was the moment, et cetera? We don't need to get into all those different questions for now. That's probably a completely different subject.
Yeah, that would be a very different
different subject.
Right.
But you can hire people to essentially... I mean, this also gets into things like case studies and customer testimonials and things like that.
Right.
It's not really, I'd say it's the last resort. It's not really solving the same problem.
Right.
But if you really can't find a way to get to a trade show, if you, for some reason, don't have the gumption to say, I am going to go and say, hey, everyone meet at my nice house and invite all your customers to come over a day of the week, right? Once a year, right? Then this is probably what you fall back on.
Sure.
Yeah. And what you're usually looking for are people that are, they have to be talking to your actual customers.
Right.
That's the thing. A lot of these firms that offer this customer research, a lot of times they'll just talk to people who might be prospective clients, right? They haven't bought from you, but they're in market.
Right.
And the key thing here is that you want to be talking to people who actually are your customers, right? They have bought from you.
I think there's two different ways. One is if you want to do true customer research, right? There's huge value to that. If you are trying to figure out how to market something, then it is good to also talk to people.
Oh, for sure. But we're talking about how you figure out problems your customers might be having.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Now, one key point as far as Buyer Persona Institute and the research that they do, that is all double blind. So we never disclosed who we were working for. So when I interviewed someone at Cisco, for instance, I didn't tell them who was sponsoring the research, and vice versa, right? So neither did our client know that I actually talked with someone at Cisco.
Yeah.
Right? So there was the value to that is that people will be much more open to share with you because that's part of the deal.
Oh, for sure.
I share with them, hey, this is double blind. So you can tell me whatever it is. All of this gets anonymized.
Yeah.
So there's another value to that. And if you suspect that there are some problems, that's a really great way to find out. Because,
that could be a good way.
Yeah, you're not going to find out the exact person that's talking, but you'll at least start to see, hey, 20% of these people are saying some pretty bad things about me. I better go find out.
Yeah, I will say, because if I'm sitting on the other side of that camera and there's someone else like me out there watching this, I'm immediately going to get into decision paralysis.
Yeah.
And thinking, oh, wait, attrition was good for this, but then I could do my own event. But John just said a couple things about if you did some customer research, maybe I should do this instead.
Sure.
Listen, pick the absolute easiest one to start with, which is probably going to a conference, okay? And getting yourself out there, right? Just do something. You don't have to do the most optimal thing.
Right.
Even if the other one is like, oh, wait, but budgetarily, this would be way easier for me to pull off, but this would be difficult. Just do the easiest thing. Take the first step. If you are getting into the habit or want to of seeing if you have 1,000 customers, let's say you have 100 customers, you want to see
Right.
your top 20%, maybe your top 5 people
Right.
once a year. That's great. You're going to be ahead of basically anyone we've ever worked with in so many companies.
So true.
So
Right.
that's all you have to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of this is for your own survival. And what I mean by that is don't assume that your salespeople are going to be with you forever because
Oh,
it
yeah.
just doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So if you're not matching up multiple layers in your company, VP to VP, director to director,
Right.
operations to operations, if you're not matching those up, what happens is your sales team leaves and all of those contacts are on their phone.
Yeah. And they're
Right.
not with you.
They're not, or it's in an email someplace, and you're never going to be able to find it. And then a year later, you're hunting around for, well, who was it that we were supposed to be talking with? And believe me, this happens.
Oh, I know.
Right.
Yeah.
So you need to have other people involved. Again, another reason for a good CRM. But again, most folks don't do that. And so you have to find a different way. And one of the best ways is to match up multiple people in your organization with multiple people in your client's organization.
Well, the thing that's kind of interesting about you saying that is this is the second hard knock we want to talk about today.
Yeah.
Right? Which is that there are so many companies that they don't have an established sales process.
Correct.
So, I mean, can you give everyone a little bit of an example of, we were talking the other day about Stark Industries.
Right.
And how they had no defined sales process at all.
Yes.
Right. And talk about some of the struggles that they were getting into because of that. Right. Paint us a little bit of a picture before we go into like why you ought to be doing this.
Sure. Right. So let me go back a few years ago.
Yeah.
And when I started doing audits and assessments for customers,
Yeah.
the first thing I would ask is, please give me your sales process diagram. Should be just like a little infographic. It could be a PowerPoint slide, whatever, right? Just tell me how you go about selling whatever it is that you sell. Okay. And this goes all the way back to a program called ACT, very early CRM. It predates Salesforce, and you bought it and you ran it on your computer. And it was adequate, and it came with a little diagram that allowed you to place where you were in the sales process with all of your customers.
Okay.
Right?
Interesting.
It was
yeah.
kind of cute.
Yeah.
And so the customers that I would go out and see, that's what they gave me, is this thing that was just generic right out of ACT.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Like, just
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And, oh, that's our process.
Yeah.
But I knew that that's not their process. Everybody had their own process.
Yeah.
So the problem is that when you're using kind of a standard thing, or you haven't customized your own or discovered what your process is that matches your industry and how your customers buy, you end up having steps in the process that are unused. Your sales team goes into a CRM, and the CRM has no value to them, or it's kind of confusing. Like, why are we having all of these different stages that we don't actually have?
Yep.
Right? So then the CRM becomes useless. They don't use it at all.
Yeah, I think
right?
I think what you're kind of getting at is perhaps a better example, right? Would be talking about Acme Corp a little bit. I know Wayne Industries and Stark Industries had this exact same problem, though,
Right.
Which
Right.
is that you reach a point, and they had been growing really well, like really strong. Marketing sales efforts were great, and so all of a sudden now it comes time where you have to start onboarding more people on your sales team.
Right.
Right? Here's the problem that was so difficult is they were picking up a lot of different members of their sales team that they wouldn't find out for 2-3 years later they weren't really performing very well. They weren't making their numbers.
Right.
And so they had a wonderful training program. I mean, that was great. They were handling that in spades. I mean, doing a wonderful job there. However, the problem that they kept running into was, again, I mean, how do you judge all these people, right? How
Right.
can I get early warnings,
Yeah.
right? And when you're trying to scale like that, they just kept running into walls. And it was really slowing them down.
Right.
And they still struggle a bit with that.
Sure.
And so that was kind of like the story there. But really what you start kind of realizing is that now getting into some of the more, here's what happens if you have this problem. and you don't have an established sales process.
Right.
And by the way, when we mean sales process, okay, we're not talking about here's 4 bullet points about you're going to mention this to a customer and you're going to send an email and then you're going to say this. That is not a sales process, okay? Those are sales tools and maybe some notes that you follow.
Yes.
A sales process, okay, is a humongous like flow chart.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
A huge flow chart. We're talking about if you print it out, it would be, I don't know if I'm in frame, something like this big, okay, of literally every single step along the way of this happens. If this happens, then I do this. If this happens, then I do that. And then a month later, if they didn't get back, now I'm going to go do this. And then when it turns into an opportunity, well, I do this and this and this. Literally every single thing is laid out. There is not a single question that the sales team has to go and answer. They just like, where is it? There it is. I go do this.
Right.
And here's why that's very important, right? Is that if you don't have a sales process, you are constantly hiring not people to do sales, but to do business development.
Right, which you have. Business development has no process. That's
right. That's their
I'm
job.
I'm a purist as
Right.
far as what business development is.
Right.
So a lot of people call themselves BD people, and I get that because it sounds like a higher life form than sales rep.
Sure.
I don't think it is. But to me, business development is literally developing business that doesn't exist.
Right.
Right? So you have no sales process. You are selling something that may be brand new, and you're introducing it to a new customer base, a new industry, a new segment that has never been sold to before. So now you have to discover a different sales process.
Right. I mean, we're doing
Right.
this right now with all the AI stuff we're doing for customers.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
We're trying to figure out, okay, great. What is the sales process for that?
Yes.
How do you reach out to those people?
Correct.
You know, what is the right terminology? What is
Yes.
the cadence? Oh, this didn't work well. This does.
Right.
Right. It's very much almost like startup land.
Sure.
Right. I have
Right.
no idea.
Yeah.
Right. I'm seeing customers all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
But let me get into why you need a good sales process. And the business reason for it is one, measurement, but it's also to understand how do you put a forecast together for your business. Okay? Let me explain that. So, I know that when I get to a particular stage, let's say I have 12 stages in my sales process. I know when I'm at stage 2, I have a 10% chance of winning that business. When I get to stage 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, the percentage goes up, okay? The mistake that most people make is they give their sales team the ability to put that percentage in there. So they'll say, yeah, I'm at stage 10, or stage 11, I'm really close, but I'm still going to put it at a 50%, right? So they allow a salesperson to inject emotion into the sales process, which then affects your forecast. Okay, you never want to do that. What you want to do is have enough history that says when my sales team is at stage 2, it is always 7%, right, and so forth. So now I can apply a rule to a sales process that looks at what the business is that's forecast. So if I have a $2 million deal and I have a 10% chance at this stage, I know that my forecast is $200,000 to the
Right.
bottom line, right? So
Yeah,
I can
of
start
course.
building a forecast. Why is that important? Because your operations people have to go buy stuff. You have to go recruit people to actually deliver that product,
Yep.
right? Sometimes 6 months, a year in advance.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a sales team that really understands good forecasting, you will never be ready. You will always be playing catch up,
Yep.
like many of our customers, right?
Yeah. Well, the big thing about having a sales pipeline, I mean, helping operations is good.
Yes.
Right. And I think that is definitely a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But the biggest part of it to me is that, one, I can spot hiccups way ahead of time.
Yes.
Right.
And why wouldn't you want to?
Well, right, exactly.
Excellent.
And
Yeah.
so the big thing that you're really looking for here is that, hey, look, I'm seeing that in about 9 months from now, we're going to be in a little bit of trouble there. So we need to start working together with our sales and our marketing team to put together a campaign for right now.
Exactly.
To go and figure stuff out. Because I don't know if all of you viewers know this, right? But for example, when you're looking at companies that run, for example, let's get into consumer stuff just for a moment, right? If I'm Macy's, right, or I'm Best Buy, and I'm putting something together for Christmas, they have locked down and started all that work back in like April,
Sure.
right? They're doing it right now, and all their plans are done. So now it's about execution, which helps free up so many brainwaves for people because I'm not running full throttle, redlining all the time. Creativity is impossible to come by if I'm already always worrying about literally the next week.
Yeah, and retail's really good about that. I mean, they have
They
a
have
lockdown.
to be.
Yeah, they have a lockdown in August or September, and
Right,
then nothing
right.
changes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
just an example. I mean,
Yeah.
for B2B, a little bit different, obviously.
Yeah.
But that's, to me, one of the big benefits of a pipeline.
Yes.
And to kind of reiterate your point, if you don't have an established sales process, that flow chart,
Right.
you won't even know what the steps are,
Yes.
right? Because the steps are not what Salesforce tells you they are, right? It's not open, attempted, contacted, unqualified, qualified.
Right.
Right. Those aren't your steps when you're making a lead, right? Your
Well,
steps
they
are
may be for somebody, but they're not for
no,
anyone we've
even
met.
for anyone else, they're definitely more fine grained than that.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it has to be. Right? I mean, there are so many different things that go on in a sales process, no matter how simple no matter how simple it is at all.
Right.
Right? And so if you do have one, though, not only is your Salesforce very customized, which makes it a lot easier to use it for data, which
Right.
is exceptionally important in the age of AI and data analysis, right? You're kind of behind the times if you aren't able to use it for that.
Right.
But in addition, then, yeah, I can then set percentages to literally everything. And then it's just a simple matter of math.
Yeah, right. And I love when it's just math.
Oh,
Right.
well, math gets rid of most emotions.
Yes.
And that is exceptionally important.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is kind of what I was alluding to is one, it makes it a lot easier to scale because some of the absolute best people that I've ever met that do sales. All right, I'm thinking about Mr. D.
Right.
All right, amazing salesman. Holy moly, that guy is so good. You know, he's not good at making up a new process.
Right.
He's just not good at it, and he shouldn't be. Right? He's great at looking at a flow chart, following it, literally doing it. The guy is a machine.
Right.
Right? And there's so many great salespeople out there that are so good at following a process. And by the way, what I am not saying that they shouldn't have any creativity when they're talking to a customer.
Right.
They absolutely should. And in fact, any of you salespeople watching this, I'm sure you know, if you had a good process, that frees up you to be curious, to be
Right.
creative,
Right.
because you know everything else you already have to do. You already know it works. So you can kind of mix and match a couple of things together. And all of a sudden the customer's like, wow, that was
Right.
awesome.
Yeah.
Because you had a process. You didn't have to do all that stuff you honestly probably don't want to do.
Right.
Right. And also you have materials put in place to go help you get over those humps. I can go find out why is it. For example, this is another benefit.
Right.
I'm going to make it very clear. This is another benefit. Right. I can go find things that are wrong in the sales process.
Right.
Because now I can compare I'm not comparing apples to oranges.
Right.
I'm comparing apples to apples.
Right.
And when I get in a sales call with all of the members from my inside, outside, any member of my sales team, and I ask them to do basically like a roll call, like you talking about you did in some of your jobs, right? Where I'm going through every single lead.
Yes.
Every single one. Which, by the way, if you don't have a sales process, those meetings are almost impossible to do.
Right.
They're very hard.
Yeah.
Right. I can find out, hey, I'm at stage 7. Right. The customer really feels like they're right here. I did this stuff here. I'm just running into a wall. What can we do?
Right.
Right. And those are golden opportunities.
Right.
Because one, great opportunity to do sales training. 2, great opportunity for your marketing team to come in. Because by the way, how do we define marketing? It's what you do when you
Can't go see someone.
exactly, which is literally what they're defining.
Yep.
Right. So golden opportunity for marketing to go and come in.
Right.
And then thirdly, you might find out your sales process is missing a step.
Right. Yeah. Let me get into one other thing that I think is important about a sales process, and that is what I call stuck deals. This is where if you look at on a very grand scale all of the deals that are in your pipeline, and just imagine those are little balls if you in a funnel, okay, and the funnel's full, and you really can't see because they're all kind of falling in different stages, different rates, and so forth, right?
Yeah.
However, I can guarantee you, if you look at your pipeline
Yeah.
and you separate all of the deals that have been stuck there for longer than a month, 2 months sometimes, and it's all at the same stage, or you'll see it was at stage 7 and then backed up to stage 5 for some reason, okay? And you just separate and look at those, generally speaking, it's something that affects your entire sales team. That is where you need to call in your marketing team and say, we have stuck deals at stage 7. What can we do every time we get here? Is there a presentation? Is this something that the customer is pulling back? Or this is where they always start looking at competition. And God knows, everybody looks at competition, right? Especially you think you're going to win, and you get pretty close to the end.
Yep.
And then the customer starts doing even more internet research.
Yeah.
Right? They get a little cold feet. They don't know if you're the best price. And so they start going out to the market again, and they're just kind of double checking this. Or it goes from the specifier over to purchasing, and you don't have a good relationship with purchasing. And so the next thing you know is that someone else has just entered the deal. And as my mentor, Frank Gill, would say, the barracuda comes in and steals your lunch, right? And
very
that
much so.
happens all the time, especially if a C-level executive has a relationship with somebody, a competitor, that you weren't aware of, and now it's a black swan. You love to talk about black swans.
I do.
All
Thank
of
you, Mr.
these
Voss.
things. Right. I know. It's great stuff. That's probably another topic we should talk about sometime.
Oh, I ain't sharing
Right.
that one. That'll be on the premium plan.
Okay,
That's my favorite guy in the world.
Yes.
I'll share him some other day.
Right. He's great. So I think about like the assessments that I did, and I would ask people where in all of the sales process are you running into hurdles, and what is the priority of fixing those things?
Yep. If they even had a sales process.
Right. But then that's why I bring this up.
Yeah.
Is that if they don't have a defined sales process, then they cannot tell me exactly. Every salesperson is going to disagree on the names of every one of those sales steps. So they're going to identify a different step as
Yep.
where the problem is, right? If they're all on the same page, then they're all going to be able to pick out where deals get stuck.
Yep.
Right? So it all kind of solves that problem when you follow a process. And the process is not something that came out of a book. It didn't come out of the CRM system. It didn't come out of some seminar that you went to. It's something that your sales team has defined. And I would say run through your customers as, the proven process for how we work with a customer.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So how do you get started? I mean, because to me, the main goal that you want out of all of this, right? It is not a bullet list of do's and don'ts. Okay, don't get that confused. Okay, that's kind of like going to sales training. All right, this is not sales training. It aids your sales training, but it is not sales training. Okay, so what you really want out of this is a big flow chart.
Yeah.
So now the question becomes, all right, great. I am sold on this. David and John, you've gone chapter and verse. I am a newborn believer in having a flow chart for my sales process. Okay.
Right.
Wonderful. Now, how have
Yes.
you found it to be successful in starting to build that sales process? Because
Okay.
by the way, just for a preface right now,
Yeah.
you don't need to get it right the first time.
Right.
You
Well,
don't
in
need
fact, you'll always be refining this because the world changes.
Oh,
right?
the world changes all the time.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to drive to is you're not aiming for perfection. Because the thing is, you probably don't want perfection.
Right.
And the reason why I'll say you don't want perfection is John brought up a very good point, which is you want your sales team to feel like they were involved in it, that they were own it, right? That this is their baby as well. Because
Yes.
if they don't feel that way, they will never follow it,
Yes.
right? So how have
Yep.
you found in your experience?
Right.
Right? Tons of experience. I'm sure
Sure.
you've been through instances where people started to put together a process.
Yes.
Can you give everyone a couple, I'd say a couple things of this is what I found works well, and
Yes.
this is an example of something maybe not to do. Like, don't do this, just
Sure.
even if it's funny.
Right. Right. Well, I'll tell you that this, for the most part, is something that you shouldn't do inside. You need to hire a consultant to do this.
Okay, number one,
Right.
hire a consultant to do. How would
Definitely.
what type of if I am looking for someone like this, okay,
Right.
what do they generally call themselves?
Yeah. So you're going to find a sales consultant that really understands sales process.
Okay.
Right? So not a sales trainer, could be a sales trainer,
Yeah.
but somebody who understands process. So I'll give you an example. I don't know if this man is even practicing anymore. So this goes back a number of years. But I hired this man called Jim Meisenheimer. Jim, if you're still around, love you. He came into a company I was working at. I was director of sales and marketing. It was a company called Productivity Point International. We are a global computer training company back in the day. And so we were facing the same problem. So we hired Jim to come in for one day. And it's one of these really crazy, wacky things because he said, I have one question that we need to solve today before we do anything else. And so he goes up to the whiteboard and he writes, what is a sale?
Oh, gosh.
Okay.
Yes.
Right?
True.
Exactly. So we had, I think it was like 10 or 12 of our top salespeople. I know Rob Correo was, one
Yep.
of our clients now, but he was in that meeting, and I think Brad Bodell, another name, Megan Slifka. So anyway, these are people that were some of the best salespeople I've ever worked with. Right?
Yeah.
Still to this day. Mm-hmm. And he wrote that question. And I think the immediate reaction is, okay, we're going to get done in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
We spent the entire day answering that question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Until it got to Dan Cox out of Kansas City, and he defined what a sales was for our company, okay? Not your company, our company back then. And he said, I define a sale when I am on the speed dial on my customer's phone.
Oh, that's good.
Right?
Yeah.
I know that I'm so embedded that I'm on their speed dial. Right? And all of us finally got to that point, and we all looked at him like, yeah, that is a sale. It's not about the cash register ringing. It's not about winning a deal. It's not about going out on a golf tour. I mean, all of those are good things.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
But for us back then, that's how we defined it. And from that point, then we said, oh, that's the goal. All right?
That's where your sales process ends.
That's where it ends. And so it was really easy to say, what happened before that? What happened before that? What happened before that? Right?
Yes, because you defined the start.
We knew where the end was.
And the end was.
Exactly.
And so now everything that it just comes together in between.
Yes. So that was it. It was the best spent one question, one day, all of us out of the field for a day. And it seems kind of crazy that that's all we did that day.
Yeah.
Right? But it really defined where the company was going. And by the way, that was a franchise. So we used that in our training then.
Yep.
So we had our franchisees would come in for sales training, and that was one of the things that we started with. Like, hey, your goal is to get on their speed dial. Okay? Now, we don't really have speed dials anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
It's true.
But I think you can apply something like that. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, speed dial is basically Alexa, call dad.
Exactly.
By the way, if anyone's dad just got called, I win.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know that happens. It's really hilarious.
Oh,
when
it
that
happens all the time. That's why I did it.
Yeah, that's really great.
And by the way, if you're thinking, hey, that's a really simple question, I could run it myself. Please, for the love of all that is good and holy, do not do that.
Right.
There is so much more that goes into these people that are immensely well trained to handling all the different psychologies of everyone in the room.
Yes.
Handling temper tantrums that happen, right? Easing into a question, answering follow-up questions, right? There's a lot, okay? So don't think you can actually just do this yourself, all right? If you want to brainstorm or you're one-on-one with one of your sales reps and you're just kind of curious, that's fine, okay? But if you're thinking you're going to run the whole thing because John just gave you the golden question, don't get ahead of yourself, kid, all right? Just slow down just a little bit.
Right. And also know that when you, let's say you're the business owner or you're the heavy in the company, fortunately, the two people who ran sales back then, Tim Preheim and Kent Barnett, did not participate in that meeting.
Yeah.
And that was really smart of them to stand out and let us talk among ourselves, right? And then present where we ended up, right? I think otherwise it just jades the whole conversation.
It adds a lot of
People-
friction.
Yeah, people don't want to be honest.
Exactly.
And so, or
So you might not-
candid's maybe a better use.
Yeah,
of the
so
term.
if you're a business owner, you might not be involved in that conversation. It might just be your sales reps, and they'll tell
Right.
you what happened afterwards, and you have to trust them enough to do the job.
Yeah, you do have to have trust.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
Right.
I mean, I hope you do, because if they're selling your product, they're in the name and face of your company.
Yeah.
So if you feel like you're super beholden your sales team, that is a whole different topic for
Yeah.
another time.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Right.
So you got the first question.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure we keep our good promise to everyone listening, that we go through. So that was one thing to do.
Yes.
Right? Is there anything else, any other tips, or like do this, do not do this?
As far as sales process.
Yeah, building one
Right.
that you would give someone. You don't have to give
Yeah.
like 15, but one or two would be fantastic.
Sure. Right. Yeah. So again, I think starting with my Trek diagram is a good place to start. Again, that's a template to use.
Yeah.
And the first thing that
What
I
does
tell
what does that stand for?
it stands for thinking, which is the first thing. That's my strategy.
T.
That's my T. Reaching, or the outreach component of that. That's when something actually falls into your pipeline. That's when you can start forecasting. If you don't have it, again, last time we talked about BANT qualified. If it's not BANT qualified, then it can't go into your pipeline.
Budget, authority, need timing.
Well, again, timing of the salesperson's commission plan. That's the
Yes.
key, right?
I know.
Right. And then engagement. That's the engagement component. And then K is the keeping part. And that's what I think most businesses recognize, that the majority of their business does come from repeat sales.
Yeah.
Right.
Hopefully.
And so, yeah, you want that cycle to continue. And so
Yeah.
that keeping is really important.
Yeah, thinking, reaching, what was it?
Engaging.
Engaging, and keeping.
Keeping, right.
Yeah, and the reason why this is a helpful diagram or thought process to use is because it helps you start to segment all the different activities your sales team might already be doing or not be doing.
Right.
And seeing, oh, I have a lot in the T and the R, but my E is empty.
Yes.
Oh, well, maybe our sales process ain't so good right now.
Right.
Yeah, and so you start putting those all together.
Yeah.
And that helps you start to, even if it's not a perfect flow chart yet, it helps you start to find out what other activities you need to be doing.
Yeah.
And start much more. It's kind of like that question of psychologically, the way our brains work is when you ask for a very general question, your brain comes up with emptiness.
Right.
Right. If I ask all of you right now, right, name for me 3 things that are in your refrigerator, that is a lot harder question to answer than name for me 2 sweets you have in your refrigerator right now that you might eat in the next week.
Right.
Right. Oh, well, instantly my head goes to like ice cream.
I'm thinking ice cream right now.
Right. Exactly. Right. Very easy.
Yeah,
because,
that vanilla ice cream I just bought. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
It's very easy because your brain has something to latch onto.
Yes.
Right. Because your brain's very good at identifying and categorizing things. And so if
Right.
I give you a categorization,
Yeah.
you'll latch onto it. And so having a framework like that, even if it isn't Trek's just one we like to use.
Right.
It's immensely helpful for starting to identify some of those things.
Yeah. So I don't want to sound like I'm in conflict, because I earlier talked about using a template out of ACT or out of Salesforce, and now I'm saying, oh, hey, here's a template. What I want you to do, though, is the first thing I tell people is take my diagram, which is pretty thorough, has a number of steps in there, and cross out all the steps that don't apply to you. For example, I have one called presentation. Not every deal or not every sales process has a presentation involved in it. So you cross those things out and start to shorten this. Now it's easier for you to add in steps based on history of selling to customers. Now, again, if you're a startup, you do not have a sales process. That's for your business development team to develop that for you and come back and build that, right?
Yeah.
So you have to start someplace, and just like you're saying, give us some anchor. And, again, ACT was fine back in the day, but it wasn't the defined process. And it also ended at a sale. It never completed the cycle on the keeping side. It really didn't talk about the engagement.
Right.
It didn't talk about the research phase, the thinking that goes in, the developing your strategy. So I think the Trek diagram is a little bit more holistic. But again, I tell people, cross stuff out and then start adding in and use your own words. You don't have to use my words. They're just good steps.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just like we said for seeing customers, just having the desire to at some point have a beautiful flow chart of a sales process.
Yes.
Where you can bring on people instantaneously and say, just follow this process. And a good sales guy can probably get on board in a couple weeks.
Yes.
And just go. If you have a desire for that, you will find a way there. We're just trying to give you some hints to how to get there yourself.
Yes.
Because it is an ongoing process. It's living. If you're doing it right, it's never not changing. It's always improving and changing with the times and getting optimized, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, the last thing we have to talk about here, right before we get into, you have a question for me, I have a question for you.
Right.
Right. Is keeping employees on that process.
Right.
Right. Because some employees might want to go a little bit rogue, right? It happens all the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And so something that's also very important to be thinking about, at least as you're making this process, right, is having some type of an incentive program.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this has to do with sales incentives and what is it that you are trying to achieve. Now, this will cause some people have a real burr under their saddle, unfortunately.
All right.
Okay. Because they believe that salespeople should be compensated on winning business. And when they win business, especially those that are on 100% commission, right, fully paid only when something is delivered, like insurance salespeople, for instance.
Yeah.
Right. That's an interesting model, but it's one that I really don't agree with.
Okay.
All right. And here's the reason why. There are so many steps in the process to get to that end.
Yeah.
And what you want to do is just like when you're raising your children, making sure that everybody gets to school on time or whatever it is wonderful. But what you're really looking for is to build habits. And the habits in sales are these steps in the process. And if they achieve them, that's when I want to create a reward. And the farther along they get in the process, I want to continue to reward them. If they win a sale, that's wonderful. And maybe I have a bonus for that. But I've found that the best incentive programs actually reward you from hitting every one of those steps along the way.
Even if you're getting a no very fast.
And even if you lose the business. If I trust that I have developed a good sales process and it works, and I can take a salesperson, even from a different industry, and I can say, here's my formula. If you walk through these steps and you do what I say, and I'm going to reward you every one of those steps, you accomplish those, you're going to make a sale.
Yeah.
Right? Now I have a believable story. And so that's the incentives that I'm much more akin to. I like those.
Yeah.
And so you can develop point systems. There's great programs out there from many different companies that we've even worked with that are in the sales incentive business.
Yeah.
And gets into compensation and, that you can't have monetary compensation may not be the only thing that thrills people. It may be a trip. It may be some other reward.
Yeah. That starts going into like a whole different
thing.
topic.
Right? We have about that another time.
Yeah, we really should. Because, we're big believers. We've got one of the books literally right here that talks Traffic Converse about that stuff, right?
Yes.
That's why it's here.
Yeah.
I love you, Dan Airley. If someday you watch this, God bless your soul. Right.
Yeah, we do lots of name dropping this.
Oh, I love name dropping this stuff.
Right.
At some point, maybe we'll go through each of these books and why we love them so much. That could be a fun little side episode.
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah, but the main thing I think that you mentioned about a good incentive program, right, that at least think about it, right, because almost a lot of incentive programs are all based on the end.
Yes.
Okay. You have to think about the reason why a sales process is so good. Okay. Besides from all the other tracking and the pipelines and onboarding people faster, right? Is that it gives a lot of accountability.
Yes.
And it is unfortunate that today almost everyone thinks about the term accountability being bad. But here's the thing: what accountability truly means, right, is if I'm in an airplane and I'm a pilot, am I going to, as the tower, going to go dial him in 5 seconds before he lands and tell him, you're at the wrong airport? Well, no, I'm going to be constantly checking in with him like every 10 minutes saying, hey, your airspeed velocity is 10 below what we actually thought, what's going on. Oh, don't worry about it. There was actually a cloud here that you didn't know about. You should go update on your system, etc. Right? It's that constant feedback and forth.
Right.
Because accountability is just as much to help me as it is to help you. It's an opportunity for me to give you an update saying, hey, yeah, this is what happened here, as much as it is for you to say, hey, maybe you can go and improve this for next time, right? It's about elevating people, about teaching them, right? It's not supposed to be this negative thing. And so what's nice about having a incentive program that is so focused on the steps, right? Not only does it teach the individual, which
Right.
is good,
Exactly.
but it
Right.
also helps keep them accountable in a good way, right? To say, great, you did that. Wonderful. Here you go, right? And it's not all of a sudden, I don't get anything if I completely failed because the only check in, the incentive program, right, was at the end.
And that's what happens.
That-
Right. And people lose heart along the way, honestly. They really do. And I've seen many really good salespeople, or just in a general, lose heart because they're not making progress toward this end big goal, right? And they miss the steps along the way and they don't reward themselves on those little daily achievements or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So, and I think a lot of this is just like raising kids. I mean, mom was great about doing that and giving you rewards along the way and the charts that she put up and so forth. I mean, I think those are all really, really good instructional tools to use. And
But it's really about building those habits.
it's building habits. It really is.
And your habit can't be win the sale.
right, exactly.
Your habit has to be I'm going to go and drive out to this person once a week.
Yes.
Every single time before I go to my meeting, I'm going to make sure that the location is accurate. And then I go tell my sales manager that this is where I'm going to be.
Right.
That I'm, all these small little things because then you don't ever have to think about them anymore.
Right.
Right. And you just feel so much more freer. It's wonderful. I mean, I think we're almost overselling it at this
Yeah,
point.
right. Yeah. But I think that the point is this goes back to the sales process.
It does.
Do you believe that your sales process works? And if it does, and you've refined it enough, then you ought to be able to invest in it. So when people reach various stages, they've made a presentation, they've handled a particular objection from a customer, they've added something into the CRM.
Right.
That would be wonderful, right? I'm
Yeah.
rewarding people for putting money, for putting data into the CRM.
Yeah.
Those are-
It'll turn into money.
Right, exactly,
It'll
right.
turn into money.
That's where my brain was.
Yeah.
So, those are all really good things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that wraps up our 2 hard knocks that we go through every single time here.
Right.
Which means we got to go to one of the other fun segments here.
Yes.
Which is where I ask John a question about something we just talked about,
Yes.
or maybe came to the top of my mind, or I've always wanted to ask and haven't had the opportunity to, and he does the same thing to me.
Right.
So I'm going to start off here saying I'm really curious.
Right.
Of all the companies you've worked with or have helped over the years, what is the most interesting thing you can think about that they have learned when they actually finally went and saw a customer?
What was say that again?
What is something that they learned that they never would have if they didn't go visit a customer? What would you
Okay.
say is maybe one of the most interesting things
Right.
or impactful or like, oh my gosh, if we didn't know that, that would have been bad.
Yeah.
Any of those.
Right. I think that I'm going to go way back in my history. But when it was instituted on us back at Intel, when we were literally losing our shirts, we didn't know that we were, but it was discovered that we started losing a lot of our business,
Yeah.
key customers, and we started visiting with our customers and asking them things that we had never asked them before.
Right.
And we found out that our competitors really had won a lot of business. They had done a lot of work, and we weren't aware of it. Honestly, we were so conceited. We were so on ourselves. We had all the solutions. We had everything. Why would you ever consider something else? We became blinded to what was actually going on in the field. And so when we started going out asking questions, and coupled with that management became attuned to actually listening to us, which wasn't happening at the time.
Yeah.
And you get that. Sometimes you get so pompous in yourself that you don't want to listen,
Yeah.
right? So we had our hat handed to us, so to speak. And so when we went out and started talking to customers and finding out where we were, we really found out that we were in some really deep doo-doo.
Oh.
And we had to put a plan together, which we did, in how to win those customers back.
Did you?
And yeah, I mean, the company literally turned it around, and those competitors are no longer in existence. They are all went out of business.
Oh, so it's a happy end of an instance where you were able to fill the cracks.
Yeah. And because the company jumped in and really did a lot at that time and really visited with key customers, and our executive team actually got on the road and spent time with customers, which we weren't doing, those really contributed greatly.
Wow. Yeah, so you avoid a potential gigantic disaster.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Okay, so the question I have for you is very early on in your career, I had kind of given you an assignment. You were starting your GearNet thing, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It was
yeah.
your startup.
Yeah.
And you were going to a trade show and also a conference, and I wanted you to literally go from one booth to the next and meet people and ask them what they do. And I know that was a very uncomfortable situation for you.
Very.
Right? And I'm thinking about some of you in the audience that may be engineers and have a small company, and you may not be all that comfortable in front of a customer or meeting people for the very first time. It's easier for you to kind of hide behind a product or maybe just do a lot of Zoom calls. But when you're out meeting people face to face may be a little bit difficult. And I'm wondering how you, one, did that assignment, but also kind of got over some of the jitters of meeting people for the first time,
Yeah.
Face to face.
Yeah. Well, I will say that people over there are probably going to have a slightly easier time. One, because if you know a customer, you have an objective, you can at least go there and you know someone there, right? So that's going to be very helpful. I didn't have that.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I had a little pitch deck I had put together, like a little Rolodex thing.
Right.
Because I didn't have a tablet.
Yeah,
to go-
Wiro. Yeah, a little Wiro thing.
Yeah. A flip book.
Yeah,
basically.
it was a flip book.
To go and pitch and talk to people.
Yeah.
Because this product didn't exist yet. It was very much in my head.
Yes.
And on top of that, too, I was seeing some of my heroes. Right? Like I met Warren Spector. Right? And when I talked to him about the idea, he was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I was like, I love this man, and he's amazing, and he thinks my idea is horrible. Oh, that's not
That
a
hurts.
good. Oh, that hurts a lot.
Yeah.
And then seeing like Jesse Shell down the street, right? So I don't imagine you will probably run into that. If you do, then I mean, I survived. Okay, so the first thing that was helpful, because it sounds like what you're asking for is, if I was looking back at what I did that made me at least mildly successful doing it for my first time,
Right.
what would I echo to someone else?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
So in that case, I'd say one, book the ticket, book the flight for the entire time. Don't give yourself an out.
Right.
All right. So I didn't have a choice.
Right.
Right. My choice was either I'm going to go and do it, or I'm going to sit in my hotel room and do nothing.
Right. And a lot of people do that.
Yeah. And if I sat in my hotel room and did nothing, I would have nothing to report back with.
Correct.
So probably get yourself an accountability partner or someone in your organization being like, listen, I want you to have 15 business cards. Now, I know we talked about last week that as a good metric for doing well at a trade show is not collecting business cards. However, in this instance, literally anything to keep you accountable, be like, fine, I'll go do it. It's just helpful.
Yes.
Okay. You're not doing this to show you did a good job being a salesperson. It's just helping you get over the hump to go learn some things.
Yeah.
Okay. The second thing, it took a little while, but I learned that, and I mean, you told me this. So me telling people across the screen this is probably not going to help them too much, but I'll say the same thing because it's true. People like talking about their product.
Correct.
They love when you ask a question like, well, how did you come up with the idea to do this? Or how difficult was this? Or what was the back end like? And what I will say is that if you're an engineer or someone like that at all, right, you have things you're passionate about.
Right.
If you can find a way to bring that little bit of passion into questions you're asking someone, you'll have a great time.
Yeah.
Like you might find a new friend because, for example, GDC, right? If I were to go back there right now, I might ask little things like, hey, when you're doing not reviews. Gosh, when I'm doing testing with gameplay testing,
Right.
How does your selection process work? right? That I find very interesting. And it's just a really great way to do some ice breaking
Yes.
by asking a question that is very helpful to me to know.
Right. Good point. Good
But
point.
at the same time, they'll start asking you questions back like, oh, well, what do you do? I'm like, well, I'm here to learn. I'm here, blah, 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 blah. And you never know where that goes.
Yeah, and
right?
that's the Dan Janusis. If you ever met Dan, he is classic of saying, "I'm here to learn." I
Right.
love that.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
it's just a great. I mean, if you don't want to get into the nitty gritties of your business and company, I mean, you should probably have like a short 15-second intro ready just so you
Sure.
don't have to think about it.
Right.
But it's totally fine to be like, hey, I'm here from, Eagle Cross. I do consulting for clients in artificial intelligence and business and marketing and sales. But really, I'm just kind of here to learn because I love this stuff.
Yeah.
And so tell me more about what you do. Right? And how did you join this company? And what are you here for right now? What drew you to this show?
Sure.
Right? Who else? By the way, I just thought about this question now. If you're looking for a great way to be like, I need to know how to even get to the next booth after this one.
Right.
Because I remember I spent countless amounts of time just like I literally lapped around the entirety of GDC like 2 or 3 times because I was nervous going to the next person.
Sure.
Okay. Take advantage of the person you just talked to and be like, who else here do you think would be a really interesting booth to go and talk to?
Yeah.
Because I'm here to learn.
Yes.
You might learn. They might even introduce you.
Yes.
They literally might.
Yes.
And you'll learn so many cool things. So overall, I think I would say, if I were to break it up, I would say 1, do some pre-show planning, look through everyone who's going to be there, and identify maybe a couple booths that you think would be legitimately kind of cool to go and see what they're doing.
Yes.
Okay. Could be a big company. It doesn't matter. You're just looking to get warm.
Great points.
Get some
Right.
warm feet.
Great point.
Right.
Yep.
Second, when you're talking to someone, bring your own passion into it. Right. And be legitimately curious about it.
Yeah.
Okay. If you are enjoying a conversation, that's fine. You can leave. They'll never see you again, even though that advice has never helped me once. It's true. They probably never will.
Right.
And then lastly, take advantage of any relationship you build to build another one. To be like, hey, is there someone here you think would be really interesting to talk to?
Right.
Or when you're off, not going to be here, where are you going? Because I'm curious to know where the actual stuff to learn is, right? Because there's so many booths, there have to be a couple that only you know about that are probably looking real good.
Yeah, that's really true.
So, I mean, that's kind of what I would say about how you would make the most of a trade show if you've got some cold feet.
Yeah, I love that. And
Yeah.
I will say that almost kind of reminds me of the best interview question you can ever ask. So maybe a little bit adjacent, but it's similar to this. And it's asking, so how did you get into this industry? Right? So if you're at a trade show and you're meeting people, that's a great question. If you're on a job interview, one of the best opening lines is, hey, before we get started, I'm curious, how did you get into this industry?
Yeah, asking it on either side.
Yeah. And it's amazing because people love to talk about themselves, as you were saying.
Yeah.
And so keying in on that is huge. And I found it's a great way to meet people anyway. If you're, hey, what brought you here, right? How did you find this particular workout class or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Why, right? I think those are super helpful and
Yep.
just breaks the ice, makes it easier for people.
It really does.
Yeah.
But hey, that's all we got for this episode of Hard Knocks, right? We talked about why you really need to go see customers, why it's important to have a defined sales process. And if there are any questions that you have that are burning inside your head, like, oh my goodness, I wish John finished that story, or I wish David would talk more about this, leave a comment down below. We would love to talk about them in a future podcast we have here. We have plenty of ideas, so we'll be around for a while. Don't worry about it. But until then, we'll see you next time.